My own son stood in front of 200 wedding guests, raised his glass, and said I was a broke, bitter old man who had nothing to give. That single sentence sliced deeper than any wound I've ever known. It wasn't just humiliation, it was betrayal, and it came from the very person I had sacrificed everything for. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from all over the world. Your comments create a community where storytelling thrives, and we're so grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Now settle in, get comfortable, and prepare for a journey that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Let's get started. Silence is not the absence of a story. It is the discipline to carry one without spilling it. My name is Daniel Hale. I'm 60, broad across the shoulders from years of hauling hose packs, tight in the knees from hard landings. I used to jump out of planes into forests that roared like freight trains. Now I read weather and fuel models for insurers and utilities, looking for patterns as if a map could bargain with fire. That is what I tell people when they ask what I do. It is true, and it is sufficient. Home is a modest rental on a quiet block in Albuquerque where the sun looks bleached even in winter. My Ford Ranger sits beneath a pecan tree that scribbles the driveway with shells. The truck is sun-faded and faithful, the sort of machine that starts because it promised to. At the 24-hour diner on Central, the night cook knows my order: coffee black, eggs over easy, wheat toast. They call me Mr. Hale, the quiet one. I don't correct them. The paper folds neatly, the coffee cools slow, and no one in that booth needs to measure a man. My silence did not grow out of scarcity. It grew out of a wreck on Interstate 40 west of Gallup 8 years ago when a drunk driver jumped the lane and did not stop. Maria, my wife, was a nurse who liked plain shoes and desert rain. After the funeral came lawyers, then the settlement, and then a non-disclosure agreement that stapled our grief to secrecy. Money appeared like a bright, cold star I was not allowed to name. In a safe deposit box, I keep what matters more than any number: a letter Maria wrote the week before she died, careful loops in blue ink that asked me for one promise: do not raise our son with money, raise him with boundaries. The letter lives in a bank vault, but the sentence lives in my pocket. I keep a metal credit card and almost never use it. Bills are paid on time. Shirts are mended until they cannot be. It is not penance, it is a way to stay in the lane where I can hear myself think. The day I start dressing my worth is the day my worth starts dressing me back. I have no appetite for that costume. My son, Ryan, works in marketing for a software company in Austin. He was a mild boy who grew sharp the way a river carves its bed, slowly, invisibly, then all at once. He is 28 and engaged to Elena Avery, whose family tends vines in Napa and speaks of vintages like grandparents. Their world is cork dust, French barrels, and scores in glossy magazines. Our world was OR green, smoke, and overtime. There is nothing wrong with either, but the distance between them can be the length of a life. The wedding will be in Sedona at Red Mesa Resort, where the buttes stand like cathedral walls, and the evening light makes the stone look warm enough to touch. I have seen fire run that kind of country, and I have seen rain polish it clean. The invitation says black tie optional. I choose a suit that fits because it is comfortable, not impressive. I travel alone with a small bag and boots that have nothing to prove. At the resort, I take the end-of-hall room with a view of the service road. I prefer edge seats. From the window, I see staff carts clip through juniper and hear music from the terrace in a faint, well-behaved thrum. The air smells of sun-baked stone and pine resin the moment the heat loosens its fist. I hang my suit, set my boots heel to toe, and place a small black case on the desk. Inside is the key to the bank box and a photocopy of Maria's letter. Talismans matter even to men who pretend otherwise. It is easy to be misread at gatherings like this. Plain clothes and a quiet posture read as shortage in certain rooms. What I call peace, others call not enough. I have learned to let that translation occur without editing it. The cost of correcting people is too high when a day is meant for celebration. This is Ryan's day, I tell the mirror, the only audience I indulge. Keep the peace, Tom. Keep the silence. The mirror offers no argument. Sedona stages the sky better than any place I know. On the drive from the airport, I pass tourists at the overlooks holding their phones at the same hopeful angle, trying to bottle a horizon. Horizons are not for bottling. You drive through them and look for the next one. Evening pours a red wash over the buttes. The remaining heat is not heat, only the memory of it. Wind moves through the pines like a low choir with its hymn half remembered. At the diner a week before the trip, the server asked if I was excited for the wedding. "I'm proud of my son," I said. She smiled and told me that was the same thing. I didn't argue. Pride is a small word for a large ache. You want the world to be kind. You want your child prepared for when it is not. Those desires do not contradict, but they rarely agree on tactics. I do not plan a speech. I do not plan anything beyond posture and breath. I think of Ryan at 8, knee-skinned, asking if fire had a face. I told him no, fire had appetite. I think of Maria on the porch the last summer before the crash, saying the monsoon smelled like green dust. Memory is a careful animal. If you are gentle, it will come close and eat from your palm. If you chase it, it will vanish into the brush and you will stand there calling a name you cannot pronounce. Night slides into the room with the kind of desert cool that feels earned. Somewhere on the property, a rehearsal band plays the same 8 bars until the brass believes them. I leave the window cracked to let the wind carry their effort in. I set my phone face down, turn off the lamp, and let the dark settle around the bed like a hand on a shoulder. Tomorrow I will keep my seat at the edge of the room and let the day belong to my son. If I am asked to speak, I will pass. If I am pressed, I will smile. If I am misread, I will allow it. Silence can be mistaken for lack, but it is also a sheath. The blade inside is made of truth, and I pray I will not have to draw it. If you're still watching and want to see how an ordinary father's quiet life hides a storm about to erupt, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move on to point number 2. The terrace at Red Mesa was staged to flatter people who liked being seen. String lights drifted overhead like patient constellations. The quartet sent a clean ribbon of sound across the sandstone. Servers slipped between tables with the acrobatic grace of those trained to be invisible. My place card waited by the kitchen door where the air conditioner breathed a steady draft onto the back of my neck. Every time the door swung, heat and garlic rolled out. Every time it shut, the clatter retreated as if embarrassment could be hinged. From that corner, I could see the long head tables angled toward the view. Laughter spooled out of them in bright, confident loops. The Avery investors wore linen that never wrinkled and spoke in price points as if they were punchlines. Barrel allocations, oak provenance, the cost of patience in years and in dollars. A man with cufflinks shaped like grapes said a number that could have bought my truck 5 times and waited for laughter. He got it. Another asked whether the new label printers could talk to the bottling line like Tesla over Wi-Fi. Someone said yes as if the future had personally RSVP'd. Elena made a point to stop by my table on her way to greet a cousin. Her smile was steady and not performative. Gratitude shone through the varnish of the evening. She thanked me for helping wrangle a late shipment of corks last month, news she shouldn't have known I'd nudged from the shadows, and smoothed the moment like a hand over a wrinkled tablecloth. "We're glad you're here," she said. The sentence landed the way a chair lands when you test it with your weight, and it holds. Victoria Avery approached later with a glass of pale wine that looked like it had been chilled on a higher shelf. Her voice was honey that had decided it was better as glass. She asked whether I'd considered moving closer to Austin now that Ryan was among tech people. I told her I had work in the West advising counties on wildfire risk. She said it must be rewarding in its own way, and let the phrase hang there with all its polite condescension. Then she migrated back toward a cluster of men describing yield curves with the contentment of fishermen describing rivers. A guest I didn't know touched my elbow and offered kindly and loudly to help if the hotel costs were a bit much. I thanked him and said I was comfortable. He looked relieved and moved on, having done his good deed for the evening. The resort manager, a slim man whose smile had been ironed, redirected a late-arriving couple to better seats near the rail. Family first, he said, gesturing in their direction, then caught himself looking at my table and corrected, extended family, of course. I lifted my water. There are parts of the story you do not rewrite for a lobby. Ryan's first toast arrived with a flourish. The quartet tidied up for him. He looked bright, practiced, 10 degrees warmer than himself. He thanked the friends who flew in, the team who hit their quarter, the Avery staff who turned grapes and time into status. Then, like a juggler tossing one extra object into the air just to show he could, he added, "The groom's side brings the heart, the bride's side brings everything else." The line got the laugh he wanted. It also got a handful of glances flicked toward my table like crumbs. Elena's eyes went to him, then to me. It was the quickest kind of apology, one made with the muscles of the face and not the mouth. I answered with a nod small enough to be mistaken for a blink. I have learned that rebukes spoken in rooms like these only feed the show. Better to change the subject by keeping your hands at rest. The kitchen door swung. Heat and garlic again, loud as punctuation. I could hear a server counting plates in a whisper built for triage. A violin reached a high E and thinned there until it felt like it might break. At the head table, a man told Victoria he'd secured another bridge line during the pandemic to future-proof a labeling upgrade. He said covenants and forbearance, the way other people say vacation. Someone else mentioned wine advocate scores and the way a 96 could pull a price point like Tide pulls boats. They were speaking a language translated entirely into measures of approval. A place card for the family photo call was passed to me with my last name misspelled and my middle initial missing. I pocketed it. Names are how people organize power in a room. I've seen incident commanders win or lose credibility by how they pronounce a canyon. I didn't correct anyone. I wasn't there to collect correct syllables. Between courses, a well-meaning aunt asked if I was on a fixed income. I told her all incomes are fixed by something, time, talent, or gravity. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because I packaged the refusal as a joke. I paid for my drink in cash when the server tried to start a tab. The metal card slept, heavy and pointless, in my wallet. Money is loud when you want it to speak for you. It is quiet when you have already chosen your voice. I slipped away from the table for air and leaned on the terrace rail. The buttes had turned the color of plums, the sky a pale rind above. Beyond the lights, the desert looked exactly as it always had, unimpressed. Music rode the surface of the evening and thinned as it crossed the parking lot where a valet jogged in good shoes. A boy in a white shirt stood near the hedge texting as if working a second job in secrets. The world held its breath the way a room does just before someone makes a mistake. Behind me, the mic crackled. Ryan thanked everyone who made this possible, and his paws skipped over my name with the neat step of a dancer avoiding a shallow dish. Applause assembled itself and then dismissed. I returned to my chair by the kitchen door and let the draft cool the back of my neck. I thought of Maria's blue ink sentence, the one that fit in a pocket and in a life. Boundaries, not money. Tonight I kept both in their places. I could see the storm line on a clear horizon, a bruise under good skin. The quartet returned to the course and the door swung again, bringing the kitchen's heat like a warning you could smell but could not yet name. If you're still here and curious about the first cracks that turn a peaceful family dinner into a powder keg, please comment number 2 below so I know you're following along. Now, on to the next twist. The ceremony looked forged out of light. Late sun laminated the buttes as if some patient hand had laid copper leaf on stone and burnished the edges. The wind moved like a careful usher, smoothing veils and coaxing candle flames to behave. Elena's dress held the color of fresh cream. When she reached the aisle, she touched my forearm, quick and warm, the gesture of a woman who understood that families are made first by ordinary grace. I felt it settle somewhere old inside me. Vows were said with the formality of people who knew cameras were listening. When the quartet reclaimed the afternoon and the crowd flowed toward the ballroom, the buttes kept their counsel and the light kept its bargain with the stone. Inside, the room had been arranged to worship sightlines. Head tables faced the long windows and the cameras that guarded them. A coordinator steered me with velvet efficiency to a chair near the service doors. I recognized the geography from the night before. a periphery that looked accidental because the place card was polite. The door breathed heat and garlic each time it swung. When it shut, the clatter folded itself neatly out of view like a backstage apology. A string of mothers compared florists, a string of founders compared multiples, and the glassware kept time. It was a beautiful reception if you stood where the view was intended. Elena's friends from Napa carried themselves with the easy posture of people accustomed to good fruit and good light. Ryan's colleagues from Austin spoke in acronyms that stacked like pallets: ARR, CAC, LTV. Two men from the Vineyard discussed barrel shortages during the pandemic and the way a 96 from the Advocate could turn inventory into a signal. Their laughter had the tidy cadence of people for whom outcomes usually align with plans. I watched without judgment. Fire had taught me that confidence is often just practice in public. Yep. A coordinator trilled us into formations for family photos. My name came late and came wrong, and my middle initial vanished entirely. I took the spot she pointed to, outer ring, background height, and pressed my shoulders back so the suit read as ironed. Cameras made their brief lightning, compliments swapped places. Someone said Sedona was cheaper than Tuscany and managed to sound generous. The quartet's high E thinned to thread, a bright tension stretching across the room. The first toast warmed the air. Elena's father thanked the staff, the winemaker, the couples who had flown too far and paid too much. The MC, cheerful with the force of a man paid by the hour, cued Ryan with a little drum roll on the mic stand. My son rose into a pool of attention as if he'd been practicing for that temperature all his life. He was handsome in the way bright rooms prefer, teeth clean, shoulders square, timing a half-thought ahead of the crowd. He opened with travel jokes and Austin heat with a memory about meeting Elena over a mislabeled case of rosé. Laughter came on schedule. Then he reached for one more spark and found my dry grass. I learned early not to choose broke, thanks, life lessons. The line slipped out clean, a fish knife at soft fruit. The room laughed on reflex before understanding where the blade had gone. A beat later, glances came toward the service doors as if someone had dropped a fork. Elena's wrist tightened around the stem of her flute. Her eyes found mine with a flash of apology that traveled farther than sound. Victoria's smile flattened into something satisfied and small. I set my water down carefully so the glass did not announce me. Ryan rode the rhythm as if nothing had bucked. The groom's side brings the heart. The bride's side, well, you can see it. The callback gathered a bigger laugh, indulgent and bright. He let it sit until the room confirmed it wanted to be entertained more than it wanted to be kind. A server refilled my glass without asking. It was the most decent act in the frame. Heat rose under my sternum and settled there like weather. Not fire, not even anger. Something lower, a slow front forming. I had seen crews lose a line when a shift change assumed the quiet was surrender. Silence can be mistaken for absence by people who have only ever listened to applause. I breathed the way we were taught when the canopy opened wrong. In 4, hold 4, out 6. The door swung. Garlic and steam rolled out. The violin found its thread again and held it to the light. Memory stepped forward with its blue ink and its plain instruction. Don't raise our son with money, raise him with boundaries. The sentence had survived 8 years of weather. It would survive this room. But the word broke had been recruited to a job it did not deserve. The joke didn't bruise my pride, it trespassed into something older, a respect that outlives fortunes. In my head, I ran the calculus I trust when a ridge changes wind. What are my obligations? What is timing? What is the cost of spectacle compared to the cost of correction? I knew the NDA window had closed. I knew I could speak and be clean. I also knew impulse is just another kind of fire. The MC returned to his list of gratitude, naming sponsors and vineyard partners, the venue team and the photographer, the cousin who designed the website where gifts could be redeemed as experiences. He thanked everyone who made this possible, and the pause walked around my name the way a dancer avoids a shallow dish. It was a professional move. Applause assembled and excused itself. Two guests near the rail lifted their phones and aimed in my direction, waiting for a reaction that would make the night memorable. I gave them the performance of a man drinking water and becoming more water by the minute. The door swung. Heat and garlic again. The air conditioner traced a cold finger along the nape of my neck. I kept my hands still, the old drill of smoke jumpers who know not to telegraph their heartbeat to a crew they're trying to calm. I looked past Ryan, past the way approval wrapped him like stage light, and let my focus rest outside the glass. The terrace had turned its blues. The desert beyond had gone dark and exact. Out there, nothing pretended it was more than it was. Out there, a boundary kept its shape. I stayed seated. I kept the sheath closed over the blade. Truth deserves a clean edge and the right hour. Tonight I understood the difference between a crowd's lesson and a son's. I would not trade one for the other. I would prepare. I would be precise. The laughter unspooled again, and I watched it pass through the room like an easy wind that had never met a canyon. If you're still watching and ready to see the shocking moment that flips trust into betrayal, please comment number 3 below to let me know you caught that. Now let's uncover what happens next. I stood up because staying seated had begun to feel like agreeing. The ballroom continued in its choreography, laughter and polite swells, glassware chiming on cue, the quartet cooling the room's edges, while I threaded the aisle toward the DJ console tucked beside a side curtain. Night air licked through the terrace doors. Under the strings, a sub-bass from hidden speakers hummed like an engine idling out of sight. The booth was a tidy altar to borrowed electricity, a spare laptop feeding the projector, a labeled HDMI splitter, a small audio interface with gain knobs like nickel coins. I asked for an HDMI lead to run a family clip, and the DJ, a patient man with careful hands, nodded toward a coiled cable and the spare laptop already mapped to the ballroom projector. I thanked him, then pulled my phone, turned the screen up, and opened notes. I began the log the way we used to log a jump: location, date, purpose. I typed the room name, the city, the hour. I wrote that my intent was to correct a public misrepresentation respectfully with verifiable records and to anchor the correction in a mother's letter. When the words were squared, I started a voice memo and recorded a single sentence about sound, mind, and purpose. The red waveform crawled like a measured heartbeat. I saved it and felt something click into place that was not anger. Email next. I forwarded to myself a folder link with the PDFs I had prepared long before tonight had a program. Momletter.pdf, Zurich licensing release.pdf, net proceeds 12m.pdf, scholarship awards Ryan.pdf, Avery_smartlabel_ethics clause.pdf. I kept my phone in Do Not Disturb and dimmed the brightness until it glowed like a dialed-down ember. The laptop recognized the inbox without drama. I dragged the files into a new deck and arranged them like a trial bundle, clean and inevitable. First, a title card, for Ryan, from Mom. Then Maria's letter, her blue ink sentence highlighted, "Don't raise with money, raise with boundaries." After that, the release from Zurich confirming the NDEA window had closed last month and that I could disclose deal figures. A simple net proceeds summary with the after-tax remainder, $12 million. A set of scholarship records with language anonymized at issuance. The Smart Label license's ethics clause, precise and narrow. A final card. We can fix this with the truth. The AV chain needed testing, but not as a show. I connected the HDMI from the spare laptop to the splitter. The handshake click landed with the clean assurance of a seatbelt. On a confidence monitor facing the booth, the title card appeared at a size my eyes could read from the back tables. I checked that no animations would delay meaning. I asked the DJ, no reverb please, wired mic only, and could he route the projector to auxiliary input on a small hand raise. He said yes with the commitment of a man who understood weddings, bloom or wilt on micro decisions. A corridor ran behind the curtain, half lit and lined with rolling racks. I stepped into it and called my attorney in Santa Fe. He picked up on the second ring. I kept the phone low and the voice lower. NDA window, I asked. Expired last month, he said. You can show the licensing and after-tax proceeds. Ethics clause? Defensive, not punitive. Quote it, don't threaten with it. Tone? Factual. Invite correction. End with a path forward. I thanked him. A dishwasher hissed somewhere down the hall. A server jogged past with plates that smelled of rosemary and heat. Back at the laptop, I added a small footer to the letter slide. A single citation line noting anonymized 2021 emergency bridge assistance wired from a local LLC to Avery Vineyards during the pandemic. No self-identification. A breadcrumb, not a boast. The point was to let truth begin from the steady ground of gratitude, not the shaky scaffolding of triumph. Later, if the moment allowed, I would ask Victoria whether she remembered who kept the bottling line open that winter. Questions can return dignity to a room if you aim them carefully. A coordinator swept in with a clipboard and a smile that had been practiced in a mirror. "Sir, the media loop is for the couple's reel," she said. 30 seconds from a mother," I answered even. "Then I'm done." She hesitated at my calm, then deferred to the DJ, who gave a small nod as if to say, "The machine will do what we ask it to." I did not bring the safe deposit key. The original letter remained where it belonged, in a drawer that knew the shape of it. I used the scan because the point tonight was not relic but reach. The metal card stayed in the wallet. Paying attention was the only currency I needed. I double-checked that notifications were silenced, that no wandering banner would vandalize the moment with a news alert or an algorithm's idea of urgency. I breathed in 4, held 4, out 6. Breath is a way to remind the body that time remains yours. My rules of engagement were simple, and I wrote them again in the margin of the notes file, as if repetition could solder them to the moment. No accusations, no raised voice. 3 beats only: Maria's letter, value, permitted facts, context, invitation to repair, choice. If interrupted, pause. If mocked, end with dignity and proceed later in writing. Boundaries teach by existing. A groomsman drifted over with the exaggerated earnestness of a man a drink and a half past careful. "Need help with the slideshow thing?" he asked. "I'm good, thank you," I said. He offered a thumbs up and drifted back into the surface current of the night. The room beyond the curtain swelled and quieted like surf. Under it, the projector fan droned a steady contralto. I watched the title card once more on the confidence monitor and felt the rightness of beginning with Maria's voice before any number tried to make a point. The DJ gave me a discreet thumbs up. Everything was mapped: the projector, the input, the wired mic, the column of slides that would move forward like a measured argument. I closed the laptop lid halfway, checked my watch, and walked back to my chair near the service door. The door swung as I sat. Heat and garlic embraced the back of my neck, then released me to the conditioned air. I placed my hands flat on the table and looked past the tables, through the glass to the terrace, where the desert had darkened into precision. The room still believed the night belonged to applause. In a few minutes it would belong to truth sized for repair, not damage. I would not perform. I would correct. And I would let a mother speak first. If you're still here and want to watch how every failed attempt only makes the conflict burn hotter, please comment number 4 below to let me know you're paying attention. Now, let's push forward to the breaking point. The quartet landed a tidy cadence, and the MC drew breath for the next toast. I lifted my hand. The projector obeyed like a well-trained dog, hopping from the couple's photo loop to a plain white card that said "For Ryan," from Mom. The room tilted toward the screen on instinct. No fanfare, no music bed, only the soft hum of the projector fan and the clink of a late fork finding its plate. Maria's letter filled the screen, scan marks faint as pollen, her blue ink loops steady. I had highlighted the sentence that had been holding up my days. Don't raise our son with money. Raise him with boundaries. I took the wired mic, set its speaking volume, and kept my delivery square to the facts. Maria wrote this the week before the accident, I said. Not about thrift. About character conversations collapsed. Elena's shoulders loosened as if someone had cracked a window in a crowded room. Victoria's jaw set the way rock does when water tries to make a point. The next slide arrived, a clipped excerpt from Zurich Licensing Release.pdf, a red underlined clause that stated the non-disclosure provisions had expired last month and that disclosure of the agreement's general contours and proceeds was permitted. I let the words sit where law puts them, on level ground. I'm not here for spectacle, I said. I'm allowed to tell you what work I did and what came of it, boss. I advanced. Net proceeds $12 million. PDF was stark as a ledger line. After taxes and prior gifts, $12 million. No commas gilded, no font theatrics. The number was not a weapon, only the context required to retire a lie. Air changed density. The laugh that had feasted earlier on the word broke ran out of oxygen at the edge of the screen. You could hear the building think. I did not let the room drift to awe or math. Next, scholarship _ awards _ Ryan.pdf. Anonymized grants, book stipends, dates in tidy columns. These were issued without our names, I said, so effort, not charity, could do the lifting. A server lowered his phone from chest height, suddenly aware of witness and not audience. Elena blinked hard, not to dramatize, but to keep seeing. Ryan looked as if someone had lifted a mask that had begun to stick. Now the lever that matters only because it is ethical and therefore rare. Avery _smart label _ ethics clause.pdf. Appeared with a yellow bar over the sentence counsel had told me to show whole. Licensor may pause or review the arrangement if a partner willfully harms the dignity of individual stakeholders tied to the licensed work. I did not raise my voice or my chin. I don't want to invoke this, I said. Pausing labels risks payroll and workers. This is a boundary, not a cudgel. Across the investor table, glances ricocheted like quiet marbles. Victoria's expression moved through a set of calculations and returned to composed. I toggled back for 10 seconds to the footer I had added under Maria's letter, a citation to anonymized 2021 emergency bridge assistance wired from a local LLC to Avery Vineyards during the pandemic. No names, no crowing, just a breadcrumb asking to be remembered. Do you remember who kept your bottling line open that winter? I asked, even as weather. Questions like that can lift a room if the people in it want the floor to be steady. Phones rose, then hesitated, as if grief and law and love in one column exceeded a camera's job description. The MC's smile froze at half watt. Somewhere glass whispered against a linen-wrapped table edge. I brought up the final card. We can fix this with the truth. The line sat there like a plank laid across two roofs after a storm. Here's the path, I said. Ryan, a public apology, not for shame, for ownership. And a short acknowledgement from the Averys that respect, not balance sheets, is the family standard. No threats, no lawsuits, no flogging. We repair by naming what went wrong and doing better. Whispers seeded and died. One guest started to clap, thought better, folded his hands. Elena's fingers closed around Ryan's forearm, not as claim, but as anchor thrown toward a drifting hull. Victoria drew breath to speak. I did nothing heroic with my posture. I waited. Courtrooms are built for that exact silence, the hinge where choices identify themselves. Inside my ribs, the breath stayed in the jump cadence, 4 in, 4 held, 6 out, like a metronome for judgment. The 3 rules I wrote in notes circled back and checked my work. No accusations, no raised voice, 3 beats only. Maria, permitted facts, an invitation. I had kept the blade clean. Ryan's face rearranged itself in little increments. The way a man discovers the note he wanted to sing requires a shape in the throat he never practiced. His head made a small no that was not defiance, only an attempt to shake off what could not be shaken. He swallowed, his eyes wet out of ordinary biology, not theater. Somewhere near the rail a fork settled, the tiny chime a bell to end a round. I lowered the mic by an inch. Not retreat, invitation. Boundaries over money, I said once quietly, and let Maria's sentence sit in the air where everyone could try it on. Whatever you choose tonight, I added, the truth will stand. The projector held on the last card. The quartet did not move, as if their instruments had learned reverence. Heat from the service door breathed and withdrew like a tide on a narrow beach. The ballroom, which had spent an hour performing its certainty, was now balanced on a hinge as thin as a violin's high E. It took only one word to tip it. Ryan reached for the microphone. His hand trembled the way a branch trembles before it accepts the weight of a bird. He looked at the screen, then at me, then at Elena, then at the room he had thought was his audience, and now understood was his witness. The truth waited where it always waits, calm, patient, available. On the dark glass to my right, the terrace held its own black mirror of stars, unimpressed. I let my hands go still on the table and felt the old discipline return, the one that keeps a crew steady at the edge of a canyon. Now or never, the air said, and for once the air was not exaggerating. The microphone looked heavier in Ryan's hand than it had 5 minutes ago. The wire gave a low, patient hum as if reminding him that sound has consequences. He scanned the head tables, investors to his left, college friends to his right, Elena at his shoulder, me near the service doors. The practiced grin didn't arrive. I watched him breathe once, then again, a man learning the weight of air. Maria's sentence still glowed on the screen's after image, bright as a brand pressed on the room's memory. The projector fan turned like a distant windmill. Phones hovered halfway. The audience that had come to be entertained had discovered it was a jury. Elena's palm rested at the small of Ryan's back with the steadiness of a hand on a level. Victoria's chin angled up a degree into neutrality. The investors went still in the way people do when supply chains feel a draft. He didn't start with a joke. He started with a swallow. Then he found a pitch that belonged to speaking plainly. "I was wrong," he said, the consonants deliberate. The broke joke was cheap and untrue. The room absorbed the sentence like sand taking water. He did not look at me yet. He looked at the scholarship slide, the ledger line, the highlighted loop of blue ink that had crossed a continent in 8 years to stand here. "I made fun of what I didn't understand," he added, voice steadying. "My father's silence was discipline, not lack." It wasn't performance so much as inventory. He named what the word had done in public, how it had handled his father like a prop and treated his mother's memory as a lever. "I disrespected both," he said. "I'm sorry, Dad." No outstretched arms, no theater, just a sentence placed where it belonged. He turned to the guests. "I was wrong," he repeated, the phrase now a ledger closing. He faced Elena and the Averys and told them he was grateful for welcome, but the family standard would be respect, not wealth. It came out unadorned and therefore true. The MC, frozen at stage right with a smile he couldn't move, let a breath escape through his nose. A fork chimed somewhere, the small bell you hear when a round ends and the next begins. I stayed seated. I had no reason to rise into the light I had intentionally refused. I lifted my mic just enough to bridge the distance between my chair and the front of the room. "Apology accepted," I said, "boundary kept." The words were short on purpose. I added that there would be no lawsuit, no contract pull, provided the respect we named here continued when the room forgot to be careful. "Let's return to your celebration," I finished. No music sting, no triumph. The projector held on the card promising repair. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was clean. Relief printed itself across investors' faces as if a pressure valve had found open air. Elena exhaled, the kind of breath that belongs to a person who has been holding a building upright with one hand. Victoria clapped with precise rhythm and a neutral face, which is a kind of concession in certain rooms. A groomsman patted Ryan's shoulder like a man reassuring a spooked horse. The quartet did not claim the moment with fanfare. When they returned, they chose an unadorned melody and let steadiness, not victory, be the tone. The screen faded to black, and then to the couple's loop, a field, a cork, a sunset laugh. The projector fan spooled down. I returned the mic to its stand, shook the DJ's hand, thanked the coordinator with a nod that neither invited conversation nor refused it. I did not work the room for praise. I kept my edge seat in the water I hadn't touched. The discipline that brought me here wasn't finished with me yet. Around us, talk restarted in gentler registers, voices adjusting to a smaller theater. A few guests approached, not with congratulations, but with quiet handshakes, the grip of men who had seen a boundary drawn and recognized it as a thing that might hold. An aunt said something about courage and then stopped herself before the word finished, becoming a compliment. The terrace doors opened and closed, letting in the desert's rinsing wind. Inside my chest, the heat that had pooled behind the sternum stepped down the ladder and left vigilance in its place. I wasn't searching for contrition. I was measuring whether the lesson would survive the night. On the far side of the room, a server who had refilled my glass twice without being asked caught my eye and tipped his chin. An acknowledgement between people who had been present is more than furniture. I tipped mine back. My phone buzzed 3 times in my pocket. Then again, I didn't look. Do not disturb stayed on. Whatever the outer world had to say, relatives, press, a banker, maybe the licensing company's automated notice, could wait until morning. The only result that mattered tonight had already been delivered, a sentence of ownership, a boundary accepted in front of witnesses, a path back to ordinary grace. Ryan set the mic on the head table and stepped down off the little dais. I thought he would come straight to me, and part of me braced against the impulse to stand and make it easy. Instead, he diverted to the staff line and thanked them one by one. The bartender, the server who had been timing courses, the man at the door who had managed the trade winds of guests. It was a small choice, but the right kind. Repair works best when it begins in places no one thinks to film. He reached me last. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. He stood with his hands on the back of the empty chair across from me, as if testing whether the furniture would hold. "Thank you," he said, voice low enough to live only between us. I nodded. The metal card remained in my wallet. The LLC stayed unnamed. The license stayed in force. We had asked the room to adopt a standard, and for a moment at least, it had. When the quartet shifted into a waltz, couples turned to one another as if granted parole from their better selves. I watched the projector's glow slide across the ceiling, a pale tide without opinion. The highlighted line from Maria's letter lingered as an afterimage behind my eyes. Boundary over money. I let the sentence settle where it had always belonged and felt the night's temperature ease a degree. Tomorrow would bring fallout, inboxes, and whatever the world decided our story meant. Tonight, the air was honest, and the truth had been spoken in a key the room could keep. If you're still watching and want to witness the most painful choice a father and son will ever face under a room full of eyes, please comment. Number 5 below so I know you're here. Now, let's step into that moment. The ballroom cooled by degrees, like a stove turned off but still warm enough to remember heat. Small clusters formed, then drifted apart, testing the new air. A few guests approached with handshakes that were more witness than praise, the kind you give a man who held a line without asking for applause. A server paused on his way to the kitchen, touched the rim of his tray as if it were a hat, and thanked me for keeping the tone humane. I told him the thanks belonged to the room for listening. My phone gnawed at my pocket. Cousins, an unknown newsroom number, a podcaster who trafficked in founders and moral pivots. I kept Do Not Disturb on and copied a 2-sentence note from my drafts to anyone who broke through. No interviews. A son apologized. A boundary holds. Please respect the families. In the hallway by the service exit, the night air gathered like water at the mouth of a culvert. Ryan found me there, eyes the color of decision after shame burns off. He asked how to make it right after the room went quiet. I gave him 3 tasks that would travel beyond one night. A short written apology to guests and staff, a private note to Victoria and the Avery team affirming respect as the family standard and not a marketing caption, and a plan to serve within 30 days, work that no one needs to film. Elena joined us long enough to say thank you in a voice stripped of varnish. Victoria passed at a distance as if skirting a wet floor sign. Her expression had the careful grammar of neutrality. Back in the room, I wrote 3 lines in a journal that looks like it belongs to a man who repairs watches. Breath pattern, Maria's sentence, no gloating. I slept in stitched intervals and woke before dawn to the projector's afterimage of the letter floating where the ceiling should be. Checkout was a clean exit. Key card on the counter, a quiet tip for housekeeping, another for the server who had refilled my water as if dignity were a beverage. The local radio mentioned a wedding speech making rounds. I turned the dial to silence and let the desert rinse the windshield. On the shoulder of the morning, I called my attorney in Santa Fe and summarized the facts for the file. Apology delivered, no threats issued, license unchanged. He said, "Good. Keep everything in writing. By noon, Ryan's follow-through arrived. A concise group text and email to guests. No hashtags, no moral of the story. Simply that he had been wrong to use broke, that he apologized to me in the room, and that he was grateful for their grace. A second private note went to the Avery staff acknowledging that respect would be the standard regardless of vintages and bank balances. I read both and did not reply. Ownership is lighter when it doesn't have to be carried to my door and inspected. The early week media pressure was predictable. A regional producer asked for a sit-down. A business blog angled for numbers under the headline Stealth Wealth Dad. I returned the same two-sentence refusal, then stopped responding at all. Viral attention rose and fell like a gust that forgets where it was going. The useful part, boundaries greater than money scrawled in a few thoughtful comments, outlived the noise. Operations tested their fences. Investors swapped emails about reputational risk. A logistics partner asked whether the Smart Label license might be paused. I wrote counsel and the license administrator and copied Elena and Victoria for transparency. No pause planned. The ethics clause remains a boundary, not a lever. I wanted the workers to see paychecks, not headlines. Then the bank called. Avery's lender had flagged the 2021 bridge loan for review after public information suggesting third-party support. Risk committees are not sentimental. They document uncertainty as if uncertainty were mold. I set a Zoom with the bank VP and Avery leadership. On camera, I stated that I would extend support for 12 months to stabilize payroll and harvest if two conditions were signed. First, create Maria Hale scholarships for workers' children, need-based and annual. Second, fund and attend wildfire safety and evacuation training on-site for all vineyard staff within 60 days. The VP wrote quickly. Elena said yes before anyone else found a word. Ryan backed her with a nod that looked like work. Victoria hesitated long enough to prove it was not reflex, then agreed. The bank logged the extension as a mitigant and shelved the review. We papered the fix by week's end. My attorney drafted a support addendum with a sunset clause, reporting cadence, and a non-publicity stipulation. So beneficiaries, not cameras, would hold the story. Avery counsel signed. The bank removed its flag. Inside the company, conversations slid from the speech to training schedules and scholarship logistics. That pivot, more than any comment thread, told me the night had done its job. At home, I pinned a high-resolution print of Maria's letter above my desk and archived the slide deck in a folder marked Use Tools. I deleted the projector assets from my phone so I wouldn't be tempted to check them the way a man touches a scar to prove something happened. Heat stepped out of my sternum and didn't come back. Vigilance stayed, the way a lookout lingers after the crew goes to meals. I sent Ryan a 2-line message across the dark. Ownership travels. Keep going. No heart, no thumbs up, just latitude and a bearing. A day later, the confirmation email landed with the thud of something real. Maria Hale Scholarship Fund established. Initial tranche wired, training vendor booked. Calendar holds proposed. I printed the page, circled the first training date on a wall calendar, and pulled a duffel from the closet. Into it went gloves, goggles, a battered field guide, a roll of flagging tape, and the habit of walking a perimeter before you call it safe. The desert evening folded itself over the city like a clean sheet. Tomorrow would be for moving from consequence to repair, from what was said in a ballroom to what gets done in rows of vines where the wind speaks without microphones. Morning squared the edges of my desk in Albuquerque and made the pinned scan of Maria's letter look freshly inked. The room was quiet enough to hear the small tick of the wall clock and the distant traffic finding its day. I opened a blank document and wrote a short piece for the local paper. Not a confession and not a victory lap, just a meditation on silence, boundaries, and dignity. I kept names out, kept numbers out, asked the editor to run it without a comments section. Attention is a solvent. If you leave a lesson soaking in it too long, the shape dissolves. When the final line read clean, I sent it and shut the laptop so the sound of the hinge could put a period on ambition. Wiring the money felt less like generosity than plumbing. $3 million to seed Maria's line, EMT scholarships, gear grants for volunteers, micro grants for neighborhood brush clearing, and ember screens. The fund's site was plain. Sans serif, 2 pages, no donor wall. A sage sprig icon in the corner, small enough to be missed by anyone looking for logos. I tested the application flow in both English and Spanish, then tested it again on my phone, then shut the browser and let the work sit where it belonged, ready for people who needed it, invisible to people who didn't. The trust for Ryan required more ritual. I drove to Santa Fe and signed in a conference room that smelled like legal pads and coffee that had traveled too far. The document was simple: quarterly conditions and a modest annual disbursement if met. Verified service hours done without posting, 1 professional development module completed, and no public disparagement of individuals for status. A third-party nonprofit would audit the metrics. Failure would route the funds to Maria's line automatically. I asked the trustee to keep the tone human in every notice. Guardrails only work if the driver believes the road is theirs. On the drive home, I wrote Ryan a short email from a gas station lot. Guardrails help us keep the road we choose. I did not add a lecture. The asphalt was already saying enough. Napa put on its best blue the morning of training. Rows of vines ran like good handwriting toward a low ridge. Dust devils practiced in the distance. Under a pop-up tent, folding chairs squared themselves to a table stacked with laminated cheat cards, gloves, and bottled water. Elena was there with a clipboard and a ponytail that meant work. Victoria stood at the back with sunglasses that could have been armor or mercy. I decided not to read them either way. Supervisors gathered in a loose half-circle. Crews filtered in, bilingual chatter settling into the kind of quiet that happens when the day promises something different from the usual. I started with gratitude. It wasn't ceremonial. Vines do not become wine without backs and hands and heat tolerance. Then we walked through wind and fuel, embercast and radiant heat, defensible space and choke points. I translated the math into field rules: how to read a sky, where to stage vehicles, what to call over a radio when the map in your head starts to slide. We traced egress routes with colored flagging tape and rehearsed a radio check until the static got bored of itself. Crew leads took cheat cards with bullet points and a quick map. We finalized a mutual aid phone tree with names spelled the way the names belong on paychecks. Scholarship tables sat under the shade with applications in both languages and a single rule printed at the top: no photos of recipients. A field worker asked quietly whether books counted. I said yes and added a line item for tool stipends for the kind of gear that outlasts a season. Small smiles land differently than applause. They cool the ground so seeds have a chance. The day did not belong to me, and that felt correct. By noon, the crews were drilling the extinguishers and coiling hoses the way people coil rope when they expect to need it. Elena managed forms without making them look like bureaucracy. Victoria approached and asked a practical question about staging tractors during red flag days. The sunglasses lowered enough to be eyes for a moment. We walked the perimeter together and marked a gate that needed widening. The tape snapped in the light wind and held. A week later, I pointed the ranger toward a town in Arizona where last month's burn had left its thumbprint. The truck bed held masks, gloves, N95s, and water. Ryan rode shotgun and did not try to narrate the day in demeaning. The community center smelled like bleach and pencil shavings. A volunteer captain handed out job as if shuffling cards. Ours were vents and kit distribution. We carried box after box, cleaned ash out of metal lungs, and mapped addresses for elders who could not stand in the line. At lunch, we sat on a curb and ate sandwiches wrapped in waxed paper. He asked if I regretted the ballroom. I said I regretted the need, not the boundary. He nodded and didn't attempt to sand the sentence into something smoother. The curb held. Back in Napa, Victoria requested 15 minutes. We stood near the crush pad where the air kept a memory of fruit. She thanked me for keeping workers central and admitted, in a voice free of performance, that she had measured worth too narrowly. I acknowledged her stewardship and proposed a joint calendar, quarterly safety refreshers, and a scholarship committee with 2 worker seats. She agreed without turning the moment into an announcement. Some repairs prefer the shade. At home, the heat was long gone from my sternum, replaced by a steadiness that did not need witnesses. I archived duplicates of the slide deck and the op-ed and deleted the extras so I wouldn't mistake evidence for identity. After each training, I made a small ritual of rereading Maria's sentence and walking the perimeter of the site, a private audit of promises kept. The duffel by the door became a shorthand for continuation. Gloves, goggles, the battered field guide, new rolls of tape, a pencil sharpened to a point. Outcomes belong to lists even when you don't publish them. Crew leaders, 100% attendance. Field staff, 85%. Follow-up drills scheduled. 12 scholarship applications submitted in the first week. 2 emergency book stipends approved and sent. Ryan's first 20 service hours logged and verified. The trustee acknowledged receipt with a note that sounded like a person and not a system. Conditions met. Disbursement scheduled. In the evening, I tied a used strip of red flagging tape to a nail in the garage, a private tally that needed no legend. The house settled the way houses do when sunset puts a hand on the roof. A text arrived from Ryan and Elena about a small family supper, no speeches. I typed that I would bring my boots. The paper calendar on the wall carries circles now, training dates, a committee meeting, a supper that might turn into a habit. The story was tilting from consequence to resolution, from what a room had to learn to what a life can keep doing once the room stops watching. If you're still here and curious about how repair begins, not with speeches but with sweat, service, and quiet promises, please comment number 6 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's see how the pieces start to mend. 3 weeks later, the vineyard looked like a place that had decided to remember. On the safety board by the loading bay, evacuation maps were pinned under clear sleeves. Drill dates marched in a tidy column. A row of laminated cheat cards hung on metal hooks like tools ready for hands. Flagging tape, narrow and red, fluttered from egress points on the forklift aisle, a quiet language even wind could read. In the office window, a bulletin listed the first dozen scholarship approvals with names redacted on the public side. Inside, sealed envelopes waited for people whose work rarely met envelopes. Repair had turned into routine. Routine is where memory proves it isn't just sentiment. That evening, we kept our promise about supper, no toasts. Elena and Ryan's dining room had a borrowed table leaf and mismatched chairs that made their own kind of family. Takeout enchiladas steamed beside a Napa salad that tasted like someone had rinsed it in cold honesty. Phones went in a bowl by the door, candles that smelled like nothing burned low. It took me back to nights when Maria and I were broke on paper and rich in everything that kept a roof from feeling like a hat, a table, a window, a rule about listening before speaking. We ate first. Talking came on its own schedule, as if the food needed to be trusted before the room did. Ryan asked about the burn scar trip without turning it into content. I told him about the vents that coughed ash like old lungs and the way a boy insisted on carrying waters he could barely lift because it was his grandmother at the end of the line. I kept my voice plain. He mentioned his service hours the way you mention an errand that gets done because it should. Habit was the point. Victoria arrived with a pie in a plain tin and no label. She set it down, took a seat, and updated us without ceremony. The first safety refresher had a date. The scholarship committee slate was final with 2 worker seats as promised. She thanked me just once and did not reach for absolution as change. I said the work looked good. We let that be enough. Elena passed a manila envelope across the table. Inside were thank you notes from staff families written in 2 languages. We didn't read them aloud. The room was small enough to hold them without performing them. When the plates were cleared, Ryan slid a guitar case out from under the bookshelf. The latch made the sound of a decision finding its notch. The instrument was the same model I had sold years ago to make a bill shrink. He leaned it against the wall. Figured the house could use some music again, he said. That was the whole speech. I tuned by ear and played a few plain chords. The wood answered like a thing that had been waiting to be useful. We let the notes land where conversation would have tried to be perfect. Operational talk was brief because it should be. The smart label license stayed in force. The ethics clause remained a boundary, not a trick door. The bank support would sunset in 12 months if metrics held, and metrics were for adults who liked calendars. Ryan said the trustee had written a note that sounded like a person when the first quarter conditions were met. No numbers touched the table. Supper isn't the place for ledgers. On her way out, Victoria handed me a single page, typed, folded once. It was an apology for earlier narrow measures of worth and a commitment to keep workers central. No request for reply. I put it in my inside pocket where paper learns your body and becomes a version of it. Later, it would rest behind Maria's letter in the study, paper against paper, two different kinds of promise traveling together. Back in Albuquerque the following week, I noticed nothing in my house wanted to be upgraded. The Ranger kept starting because it knew its job. My rental kept the right kind of quiet. At the diner, I paid for a small brass plaque on the inside corner of the booth and asked for 3 words engraved: teach, protect, don't perform. The owner laughed when he read it and said it sounded like a recipe. Maybe it is. In the garage, I tied another strip of used flagging tape to the nail above the workbench. The tally grew toward a pattern only I would notice. On the calendar, I circled the next training date in fine pen. There is a comfort in circles. They admit you are coming back on purpose. They also admit there is more than one way to arrive. I kept the guitar on a wall hook above the desk where Maria's sentence is pinned. Sometimes, before I leave for a training, I play the same 4 chords and read the same one line. Boundary over money. The heat that once camped behind my sternum stayed absent. In its place was steadiness that made no requests. That is not to say vigilance slept. I still walk the perimeter each night. Doors, windows, switch off the lamp, breathe like a crew leader teaching a rookie how to own his nerves. It's a ritual that makes sure the day knows it is over. I texted Ryan, supper was good, keep going, and left the phone face down. He replied with a photo of the guitar leaning in their living room, light on the wood like water on a stone. We didn't trade wisdom. A carpet can only absorb so much furniture. The lesson had already been said in a room where the projector's glow had made truth legible and someone had chosen to read it out loud. Outside, night air took on the clean feel Albuquerque gets when the wind has scrubbed it clear. A train horn along the river cut a line through the dark. The guitar was quiet against the wall. Somewhere across town, a crew shift changed and a different kind of perimeter began. I turned off the lamp. The afterimage of Maria's letter faded from the room the way stars fade from a windshield when the sun takes the sky back. It did not fade from the life. Night in Albuquerque does not arrive so much as subtract what isn't needed. The desk lamp casts a tidy pool across Maria's letter, pinned where I can't mistake the order of things. The guitar leans on its stand, strings settling with the faintest breath. In the garage, a draft stirs the red flagging tape into a soft whisper that sounds like someone practicing yes. I've come to like these small choruses. They make a house a house. I used to think a boundary was a fence you erect against someone else. It turns out the first line is the one you draw inside your own hands. Mine is simple now. Teach. Protect. Don't perform. The diner plaque says it because the booth belonged to me long before the words did. I don't test myself with interviews. I don't aim the camera at repair. I write the record and walk the perimeter and leave the rest to air. Money did not give me a voice. It only offered volume. Numbers can buy equipment and time. They can buy a safer ladder and a quieter engine, but they cannot write a sentence you can live inside. Silence is not absence. It is craft. It is the discipline to wait until truth can repair and not merely wound. The hardest part of the ballroom was not the slide deck. It was refusing the easy performance of vengeance when the room leaned toward spectacle. Keeping that line is the win I don't frame. Ryan's apology belongs to him, so I don't replay it. I see its shadow in smaller things. Service hours entered without a caption, a supper where nobody needed the air to clap, a text that reads like a plan and not a performance. Ownership is a verb that looks best when it is carrying weight. Victoria's one-page note lives behind Maria's letter now. Paper against paper, promises that altered their shapes to hold a room without props. At the Vineyard, evacuation maps don't need speeches to keep their dates. Scholarships move from bulletin boards to backpacks. The license keeps working under the same clause that says dignity isn't ornamental. The bank support will sunset on a calendar because grown people signed grown documents that plan for endings. I keep what fits. The Ranger starts every morning because the key still believes in it. The rental stays because quiet lets the day explain itself. The booth at the diner remains my favorite office. Coffee tastes most like coffee when it is not asked to be anything else. I buy a new pencil when the old one becomes a rumor. I pay attention, not tabs. It is not frugality. It is proportion. Sometimes I think about fortunes. People picture vaults, portfolios, a glitter you can feel in your teeth. The only fortune I ever meant to keep was the ability to say enough. That is the inheritance I wanted for Ryan. Enough is a room you can stand up in. $12 million is a tool. Enough is wealth. I wish I had learned that sooner, but I learned it in time to say it with my choices, which is how most truths travel. The desert helps. Wind here rinses a day without asking permission. Buttes remember you without needing your name. They shrink ballrooms to size. I drive sometimes at dusk and let the sky remove whatever I picked up that doesn't belong. When I get home, I walk the perimeter, doors, windows, stove knobs, lamp. It's a small ceremony that teaches the body to release the shift. Then I sit at the desk and read Maria's line out loud once. Boundary over money. The sentence lands without dramatics and takes its chair. I'm tempted some nights to curate the evidence, to keep a drawer of articles and screenshots, to let a box of printouts call itself history. I don't. Tools used are not trophies. I delete duplicates, archive what the law says must exist, and let the rest evaporate like heat off a road. The point was never to prove a man to strangers. It was to keep a shape so love could travel without spilling. The guitar came back into the house like a dog that remembers where the bowl is. I don't play much. 4 chords mostly, the old shapes under fingers that remember more than they can articulate. Music has become a way to end a day without explaining it. I think that is what repair sounds like. Notes that do not demand applause, only a room that agrees to hold them. What remains ahead is the ordinary work. More trainings, more drills, more signed envelopes that carry opportunities farther than gratitude can follow. More weekends where the truck bed fills with masks and gloves and the list taped to the dashboard tells us how to load. More calls that end with copy instead of thank you. I do not plan a legacy. I plan my next morning. Tonight I send Ryan one line. See you Sunday. Bring your boots. Set the phone face down and let the room be a room. He replies with a thumbs up I don't need to open. I picture him setting his own phone down, the guitar in his living room catching a ribbon of lamplight. We're good, I imagine him saying to no one in particular, which is the best kind of audience. I turn off the lamp, then walk the perimeter one more time. Locks, lights, breath. The house exhales with me. In the garage, the red tape stirs once and goes still, the tally of days we chose discipline over drama. Outside, the wind moves over the city with its old, generous broom. I stand at the window long enough to see nothing happening and feel finally that it is enough. Maria's letter dims as my eyes adjust. The afterimage leaves the room the way stars leave a windshield when dawn insists. It does not leave the life. I won't pretend I know how many chapters remain, only that the grammar is plain. Boundary over money. Repair over performance. Enough over more. I close the door to the study and the hinge makes its small declarative sound. Somewhere a train calls its single faithful note across the dark. I listen until it fades and then keep listening, because some lessons continue even after the sound is gone. In the end, what lingers is not the size of a bank balance or the noise of a ballroom, but the quiet shape a life keeps when no one is watching. Wealth, when it is wise, is only a tool, good for buying time, but it cannot purchase character. Character arrives when truth is spoken without a drum roll and carried in ordinary work. The real turn is learning that enough is not a compromise. It is a room you can stand up in. Once you find it, the hunger for applause fades, and the day measures itself by what was repaired, not by who was impressed. What mends a fracture is rarely fury. It is steadiness, the repeated choice to tell the truth, to serve where cameras are bored, to replace performance with practice. Forgiveness is not a headline but a posture. Accountability is not humiliation but a guardrail so the road can be kept. The world will offer a cheaper laugh and call it victory. Wisdom lets it pass. Dignity is the discipline of speaking softly and laying out a better way than doing it again tomorrow. Trust returns the way it left, step by step. If there is a lesson worth keeping, it is this. Silence is not absence, it is craft. Use it to protect what matters until words can repair and not wound. Choose boundaries over display, repair over retaliation, enough over more. Keep the tools simple. Breathe, listen, correct, but repeat. Let the measure of a life be the good that continues when the lights are off and the room no longer demands a show. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If something in it rang true, we'd love to hear which line stayed with you. Drop a thought in the comments. For more tales about resilience, hard choices, and the quiet courage that holds families together, tap subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. And if you believe dignity travels farther when it's shared, please share this video with someone who might need it tonight. Be well, draw your lines with grace, and keep choosing the kind of enough that lets you sleep with the lights out.